Hi everybody, it's Courtney, and today I'm going to be using the Brilliant Day stamp set and coordinating dies. And I'm going to use my Misty here, and I'm using 2 panels of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I'm using my large Misty here because this image is quite large. I'm going to be using the large crayon image here, and I'm just going to kind of line that up on the bottom of my cardstock, but I am leaving a little bit of a gap between the bottom and where the image actually begins because I'm going to be layering these, so I want to leave myself a little bit of room. So I am going to be stamping with Blackout ink by Ink on 3, which is a Copic safe ink, and I've never stamped with this image before, and it is quite large. So I did end up stamping this twice. Then I can go ahead and flip my card panel around and stamp twice again. That way I'll still have that same amount of little gap on the bottom of my card panel. Next, I can take out my next card panel and do pretty much the same exact thing. I'm just going to move this down just a little bit so that the crayons aren't positioned exactly the same as the first panel. But I just stamped it twice, flipped my card panel around, and stamped it twice again. Now, I did a whole lot of coloring. The coloring actually took me probably about an hour and a half, but don't worry, I won't show you all of it, but I will show you each of the color combinations that I used. And for this first part, I apologize, I didn't zoom in, but I will in just a minute. So when you look at a crayon, the wrapper is actually a little bit lighter than the wax itself. So I'm using the same colors, but I'm going to go one step lighter for the wrapper and one step darker for the actual crayon part itself. So my scary dark color, as I refer to it for the wrapper, is the R46 for this red combination, and my highlight color will be the R21. Now for the crayon part itself, I am going to skip that R21, which is the lightest color for the wrapper, and the R89 is going to be my scary dark. Still going to use that R46 and the R24 and R22, just skipping that light color. For this little, I guess it would be the label maybe, I'm going to use some cool grays, and I'm going to keep that center highlight just like I did before, starting off with the C7 on either side and then blending that out a little bit with the C5, the C3, and then finishing off with the C1 in the center. Now, these are all obviously round objects, so it's important to keep an eye out for whatever shape object you're coloring. So whenever you're coloring a round object, you are going to have a pretty strong center highlight. So you'll notice that each of these have the highlight in the center for both the top and the bottom of each one of the crayons. And I'm pretty much keeping consistent with the same color combinations, just bringing in that extra light color for the wrapper and the extra dark color for the wax part itself. Now you'll also notice, if you've ever watched my channel before, any of my videos before, typically when I do any kind of Copic coloring or alcohol marker coloring, I use a flicking motion, and flicking motions typically give you a really good blend. Your colors will blend a little bit easier, but flicking can be difficult. It takes a lot of practice to get that right flicking motion. You'll notice that I'm not doing any kind of flicking motions at all for this. I am going straight up and down with my marker and pretty much just going straight lines, drawing in straight lines. But the color combinations that I'm using are colors that I know work really well together, either because I've used them over and over and over in previous cards, or they are part of a natural blending family. A lot of them are part of natural blending families. So you'll know that they will blend nicely, and you may not get as much contrast as you're looking for if you're using a natural blending family, but you know that they will blend without too much effort. So you can see I am going in rainbow order here. I'm moving on to the greens, and I am showing you one of each, but what I ended up doing is coloring them all with the same color combination and just kind of kept in that rainbow order. But I did want to leave one of each one of these crayons in the video just so that you can see the color combinations I use. I know I get a lot of questions about what my favorite combinations are, and I tend to use the same ones over and over, even if it's not part of a natural blending family. Once you kind of figure out what works for you. Kind of use that same combination over and over. So I figured leaving all of the coloring, or at least the color combinations in the video, may be helpful to some of you. So once I'm on the blues now, so we only got 2 more to go. Once I finished up coloring this panel, I did the same exact thing with the other panel. However, what I did was make sure that there was not a red in the same position as there was a red in this panel, or a blue in the same position as a blue on this panel, if that makes any sense. It will make sense once I finish up the card. These are basically going to be layered, and I didn't want 2 reds or 2 blues or 2 purples directly on top of one another. I wanted them to be spread out a little bit. So moving on to my final color combination here, which is the purples. And again, just keeping in that super light color for the wrapper and leaving in the super dark color for the crayon part itself. So once all of my coloring was complete, I went ahead and took the coordinating die and cut out just one of the panels, both images, but just one of those panels. Next, I'm going to go ahead and line everything up. So I want these die cut panels to be popped up in front of the other crayons. So I'm cutting up some Scotch foam tape here, and I cut the long strip in half because I wanted a little bit to be hanging off, and we'll trim that off later. And then I cut little itty bitty tiny pieces to fit on the tips of every single one of these crayons. That way it won't get stuck in an envelope as you're pulling it in and out of the envelope to whoever this is going to. And then I can go ahead and remove the foam tape and line this up. Now I want each one of my sides of the die cut panel to match along the sides of my main card panel. So I am going to use my grid mat, and I'm going to just basically line that up and use that as a guide to make sure that everything is nice and straight. And then I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to do the same thing with the other die cut panel. I'm going to cut those little teeny tiny pieces of the foam tape and line that up on my grid mat and line that up directly underneath the flat crayons, I should say. Now at this point I have a whole lot of extra cardstock, especially from the die cut pieces, hanging off the edges of my card panel. So as long as the foam tape isn't showing, which luckily I didn't have any. I didn't have any trouble trimming this down. I'm just using that. I'm flipping it over so that I can see exactly where my card panel is. I'm just going to line that up into my tonic trimmer and trim off anything that is kind of hanging off the bottom and the top. I did also have a little piece of foam tape hanging off the side there, and I just snipped that with my scissors. Next, we'll work on the sentiment here, and I am going to use one of the longer sentiments so that I can fit that right between the crayons, and I'm going to heat emboss this. So I'm taking out a scrap piece of black cardstock and treating that with my anti-static tool, and then I can stamp the sentiment with Versamark ink and sprinkle on some white embossing powder. I let my heat gun heat up for about 30 seconds to 45 seconds before actually bringing that to the paper, and that will minimize the amount of warping that you get. Once that embossing powder is cooled down just a minute or so, I can go ahead and trim this down into a sentiment strip. Now, I didn't, on that word life, my embossing powder was not completely melted, I should say. So I did have to go back in and zap that with my heat gun, but I had smudged a little bit with my finger, but that's okay. We can fix that in a minute. I grabbed another piece of the Scotch foam tape and popped that sentiment up in the center. It was a little hard to line up because of all of the crooked crayons, but I think I got it, at least to the eye, it's straight. And then I can take my white gel pen and I can fix up any areas of my white embossing that weren't perfect, and nobody will ever know the difference. The white gel pen will just kind of look like it is the embossed area. And I also added a reflection to the wax part of each and every one of these crayons. And I just added it off to the left-hand side. You can choose any side you want. And then I finished off with a little bit of shimmer with a Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen to just the wrappers of each one of the crayons. You want to be careful you don't go over the white gel pen area because you can smear it. Not always, but sometimes it smears. So that is it. That is the card for today, guys. As always, I will leave the supplies listed in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by today, and have a great day. Bye.